Hi everybody and welcome to InfoComm 2023. I'm Mark Pescatore, Content Director for Systems Contractor News. We're here at the Epivan Video booth with Sean Wargo. He's the Vice President of Market Intelligence for AVIXA. Sean, thanks for joining us today.
Mark, always a pleasure.
So how's business?
Well, trade show's great, market's great. I mean, lots of good news to report. I think while we had expected 2022 to be even bigger than it was, we still did note a rising growth rate. So the industry grew about 12.6% in terms of revenues, industry revenues globally. Good story, lots of things underneath. Ultimately, I think what we're overall talking about is we're sort of at the end of that recovery period. You could say that's true of trade shows and also our industry at large, where we know things were coming back to in person. That really drove a lot of the growth as we recovered. What we're talking about now is kind of a return to a little bit more steady state, where the industry kind of looks a little bit more typical in terms of its growth rate. I think the notion we'd all challenge is really, is there such thing as a return to normalcy at this point? But as far as growth goes, I think we're looking at a little bit more normal rate as we go forward. 5.6, 5.7% compound annual growth rate. But overall, great story for our industry, yeah.
Something I've heard you say before is that AV as an industry is small but mighty. I don't think people understand, because some people will compare AV to, say, IT or even consumer video. Can you give us a little perspective as to where we are on the food chain?
Absolutely. So our latest data shows that 2023 is going to be about a $300 billion market for Pro AV. It's a pretty broad definition of what's included in that. It's everything from media servers to speakers, displays, projectors, etc. But for reference point, even as we grow to $400 billion by 2028, we're still overshadowed by things like IT. $5 trillion business.
Trillion with a T.
Trillion with a T.
Yes.
Same thing, consumer, $1 trillion. I learned today, actually, the entire value of commercial real estate, so rental and leasing of space, $32 trillion. So that's all perspective, right? It means that we are still in some ways cottage. We're smaller than some of these nearby industries. But so that growth rate, still great, still hard for a lot of the companies that are used to getting a piece of that pie to kind of think about that opportunity set. But I think that's the point, right? Is we've been disrupted as an industry. We know technology's become a front and center component of just adapting, continuing business, engaging audiences, all that kind of sharing content. So that's the theme that carries us forward. That's what allowed us to kind of recover arguably fairly quickly as an industry, 2 years off a deep trough. So I think a positive story of how technology is an important part, even if, there's things that are bigger out there than even us. So.
Now, as Americans, we always like to puff out our chests because that's what we do. We're Americans, people. So, as Americans, how are we rating as far as Pro AV industry numbers go compared to other regions around the world?
We really benchmark ourselves against GDP. And so as you look at GDP growth across all the countries of the world, there are places that clearly lead the US in terms of gross domestic product growth, places like India, China. So the story that we've told for quite some time, even pre-pandemic, was that the APAC region would be both the largest and the fastest growing as we look at Pro AV spend. That makes absolute sense just from a population perspective. But they also have other things happening, like rising middle class, consumer class, to start to spend. So retail, hospitality, the related markets start to really grow. So US has done great. We've recovered as well. But the growth in Asia continues to surpass what we see here in the Americas, in EMEA, and keeps it in that position now that they secured a couple years ago as the largest market for AV, the largest region for AV.
Now, we're talking about lots of growth, but one area that I saw a presentation from you a couple of days ago. One area that is not showing as much growth and even a decline is projectors. Now, those of us who have been in the Pro AV industry for a long time, projectors were bread and butter for a long time here. They're going down, but are they gone? Are they down but not out?
So it's an interesting story of what's happening below the surface. When you look at our projector data, it shows about a -3% compound annual growth rate from 23 to 28. that looks like, yes, projectors kind of fading out of the market. What you have to strip out is screens and accessories. So that could be bulbs or replacement parts. As we know, in the projection market, laser technologies come in strong, higher price point. It's a higher end technology. So that's actually meant that projectors themselves are actually growing by about a couple points of growth.
Really?
So yes, and I think some of that's a value story, not a volume story. We may see fewer projectors, but where they're being utilized is for high-end purposes, larger conference rooms, projection mapping, a whole bunch of different applications. So absolutely not gone. In fact, thriving in a lot of sectors. Higher ed being the preeminent of those. I think the primary market really for projectors remains higher ed, and that you see that in our data too.
All right, so basically statistics will tell you whatever story you want to tell, depending on you want to be glass half empty or glass half full.
That's true. Yeah. 10 on the ladder, glass half empty. All right, glass half full. Really, more of an optimist myself, but it's true. I mean, what it tells you is it's a complex market. There's a lot of things going on, dynamics changing. For every category that's growing, there will be some aspect where it's being de-emphasized through time. As a case in point, one thing we noted in our recent update of our industry forecast, actually displays was one of the few categories that was oversupplied in 2022. Price points came down, so almost a counter to inflation. So you'll see those dynamics playing out where supply has an impact, we provide too much, the price points come down, it looks like negative growth for a while. So lots of things happening out in the market. Yeah.
All right, you want to be a pro AV guy when you grow up. What vertical market is the hottest right now?
Which vertical market is the hottest?
Yeah.
I would say easy to point to venues and events. So that's the part of our industry that is still benefiting from that return to in-person. So you're seeing a lot more spending as revenues return, those facilities, those stadiums, those experiences felt comfortable enough to start reinvesting. So I think I would watch that for a little while. I think that's where we would continue to see some good growth. So I'd point to that as our hottest. Now, largest is still going to be corporate. But if you're looking for growth, it's definitely venues and events for sure.
I seem to recall in your presentation you mentioned something about software being one of the sort of unsung heroes of the pro AV industry.
It was a surprise to us as we refreshed our forecast that we had been talking for years about software is really becoming more of a bundle. It's bundled in with hardware to solve a problem. What we're actually seeing in the market is a decoupling again. So a couple things. One is content management software for digital signage, for content production streaming, business management, project management. So software's come back strong in our forecast. It's actually leading in terms of expected growth for the next 5 years, around 11%. So a strong story there of just evolution, continued evolution. I think we saw it during the pandemic. Maybe data's catching up to market in this regard, where so much was moving over to either cloud or software-based, and so that's really showing up on our data. Not the largest area of spend. Content management hardware, media servers, AV servers, that's the biggest, but certainly in terms of growth, it's that software segment.
So, final question. What's the news for Pro AV? We're in a good place for a little while?
I think so. As I noted, we're kind of moving more to what we would call a steady state of growth. That looks more like the long-term average, but with a lot of disruptors in the market still, things like AI, right? That will power new utilization models, new remote managed service models, those sorts of things. I would put those as the X factors, but ultimately I see a lot of fundamental ingredients for growth and strength for the industry. The storm clouds are around this notion of commercial real estate. What happens with that? Do we see companies use less space? But for now, what we're seeing is there's maybe decreasing their footprints, but they're spending more on those spaces. They're trying to figure out how to use technology. So all of that uncertainty leads to opportunity for Pro AV as we look at the long range. So I see more blue skies and sunshine than I do storm clouds at this point, barring black swans, which we know have been the bane of everyone for the last several years.
Outstanding. Sean, thank you so much for joining us. Mark Pescatore here from Systems Contractor News. Thanks to our friends at Epiphan Video for making this happen. Thanks for joining us.